One can say that Unity of Command 2 is what you call a beer and pretzels wargame, meaning that it looks pretty. And to a lesser extent that you don't have to actually learn too much to play it. You click on your tank, you get a tank. You click on the enemy, the tank rolls in, crash boom bang, the tank's dead, the enemy's still standing, and you're off to write an angry review about how Unity of Command is a puzzle and doesn't deserve to gently massage your wargaming proboscis or something. I'm sure some of you have been there, unhappy about the game or any of its add-ons, and hopefully this video gives you another reason to revisit Unity of Command 2 and perhaps take a more patient look at it. Because the truth is that while the game is indeed accessible at first, it increasingly expects you to be familiar with its mechanics and to make good decisions based on that familiarity. If you don't, you'll just hit a wall with not too many options to choose from, which might lead you to think that there is a single strictly defined way for doing every mission, hence the accusations of puzzliness and ultimately no fun playing the game. So this is where I come in, Hexable, the fun restorer. Hello, by the way, to discuss some of the important mechanics that this game uses and give you a few tips on how to exploit them, or at least integrate this knowledge into the way you fight your battles. And the first thing we'll talk about, appropriately, is combat. Going into the fine details of UoC's battle procedure really isn't something you need to do to play the game well, but I think it's worth quickly running through the overall idea and a couple of concepts that we'll use later. So, let's imagine there is an attack, and here we have the attacking and the defending unit. Each of these units consists of a bunch of steps and has an attack, defense, and armor rating. And to calculate the prediction for that battle, you multiply the number of attacker steps by the attack ability of the attacking unit, and then add all of the attack ratings of the specialists, and then do the same for the defender, except using its defense ratings, mutatis mutandis. Divide the first total by the second, plug the resulting number into a logarithmic function, round the result to the nearest integer, and then look that number up in the combat results table. That's how you get your raw battle odds, and here's our first practical conclusion actually. Pay attention to those unit stats because they are multipliers in combat calculations, and even a difference of 1 can be huge. While fast, German light and Jaeger divisions are vulnerable and can cause you trouble on the defense. On the other hand, paratroopers are an excellent choice for defending critical hexes with close terrain. Moving on, if there are any special circumstances that affect the battle, like terrain, weather, fortifications, or things like experience or artillery, which we'll discuss a bit later, they act as modifiers and directly shift the column you look up in that table, left if it's bad for the attacker, and right if it's good. Importantly, by itself, this shift does not depend on the relative strength of your units. So in short, as you can see, having more steps in your units increases your total attack or defense, but only indirectly improves your outcomes, while various shifts that depend on the circumstances of the battle have a direct effect on them, and wonderfully, you get a lot of control over bringing in and avoiding conditions that create these shifts. Use this to your advantage. Finally, let's talk about a special type of shift that depends on unit strength. If the attacker is a unit with an offensive armor rating, shown as the tank icon instead of the anti-tank gun one, you multiply that rating by the number of steps for each of the two units, and divide the difference between the two numbers by 10. That's the bonus armor shift you add to attacker odds, and then do all of the rounding. This is how tanks get to be so powerful in open terrain in this game, and this is another reason for you to pay attention to those unit stats. Soviet naval infantry, for example, is certainly a worse choice for defense than your garden variety, while even the toughest German mechanized formations lag behind mid-war panzer divisions in easy terrain. So now that we know how combat works and what shifts are, let me share a dirty secret. I'm totally hot for heavy artillery. Give me anything that lobs big pointy things over long distances, and my only response to that is, why isn't there more? My shameful affliction of artillephilia aside, artillery specialist steps give the attacker a bonus shift of up to +5, which is incredibly powerful, and since most of artillery pieces give you around 2 or 3, there is a good argument for giving your units 2 artillery steps to exploit the full potential of this bonus. So if we look at towed guns, unless you're playing as Germans in Stalingrad, there's hardly any lack of them. They're cheap and are perfect for giving your line infantry overwhelming firepower on turn 1. Self-propelled guns are good for more experienced shock troops equipped with engineers or special forces for quickly getting into places that tanks have trouble with. Self-propelled guns are obviously a good choice for tanks themselves, though even I think double artillery in tanks is a bit gauche. They get a chunky battle protection shift from armor anyway, and may benefit from other specialists instead of that second arty. Let me also try to court you with the idea of giving more critical infantry units a self-propelled gun and a towed gun step for better flexibility, as you can still pack a punch while on march, or take a little break and launch a local apocalypse. Also remember that the artillery shift you get from your specialists affects the number of die rolls the game does for suppressive fire, the more being the better. This bonus also directly applies to set-piece attack, except as suppression instead of kills. All of this in addition to the chunky defensive ratings that these specialists add to your units. So, is there anything bad about this at all, you ask? Yes, there is, I'm sad to say. One arty turns cities into ruins, which I'm sure you already know gives the defenders an almost impenetrable fortress just like that. Every artillery shift that the attacker has in a normal attack increases the chance of turning the city into ruins by 2%. For set-piece attack, it's 4%, and for suppressive fire, it's 10%. So given the +5 artillery shift cap, the maximum chance is 10%, 20%, and 50% respectively. Do I need to spell it as? Don't ever launch suppressive fire in cities! This is actually another argument for giving weaker self-propelled artillery to your elite city assault troops. Lower chance of ruining the city. The second unfortunate point is that if the defender is entrenched in a city, the artillery shift is not going to change the predicted outcome of the battle at all. That arty should only be there for you to launch set-piece attacks. The same is true for enemies entrenched in forests, bogs, and swamps. And in mountains, and god no, city ruins, the defender doesn't even have to be entrenched. While suppressive fire will still work in those conditions, albeit worse, it may be a good idea not to give any artillery to units that are gonna spend the mission stuck in the marshes or mountains anyway. Here's a big question you probably ask every time you reinforce your troops. Do I give my divisions additional steps and lose their elite or veteran status, or do I keep their precious experience? And while initially I had an answer to this that was purely based on my experience, I decided to research the topic, take the game's combat system apart, and deliver you with a definitive answer. And while this indeed has resulted in one of the previous sections of this video, the system actually models too many different situations, and the best answer I can give you for whether to elite or not to elite is the unsatisfying depends. We've already discussed shifts in battle predictions, and experience does provide a direct shift, equal to the difference in the level of experience of the attacking and the defending units. So if it's the same, there is no shift. If one unit is regular and the other one a veteran, the veteran gets a +1 shift, and it can go as high as +3 if there is an elite facing a green division. Also, regardless of all of this, veterans and elites suffer from fewer losses, with respectively a +1 and +2 bonus shift for their predicted losses. So, the obvious thing that springs to mind is because most of the enemies you're going to encounter are regular, it's a good idea to keep your units at least at a veteran level. Also, it's easier to turn a veteran into an elite than to maintain an elite unit because you get 5 experience for every enemy killed or suppressed as a veteran, and only 1 experience as an elite. If you have 315 experience, it's much easier to get a step of reinforcements and get back to 300 than first get to 320 and pick up a step of reinforcements later. However, if you have units that will almost certainly be defending, reinforcements can be preferable because you can offset the loss of experience through entrenchment and more defensible terrain. Also, as we know, the effects of armor, both offensive and defensive, are based on the total size of the unit, so reinforcing defenders might not be such a bad idea. In the same vein, if you have to keep an elite tank division small, give it specialist steps that provide armor bonuses. These are flat values that don't depend on the size of the division. Smaller elite units will also benefit from specialist steps with very strong stats like commandos and heavy tanks, once again to offset their lack of natural bulk. Veterans or elites may take priority in maps with very difficult terrain like cities and mountains, compensating for their terrain penalties with experience shifts. In any case, no matter how elite your unit is, it can and will lose steps, so to avoid complete wipeouts, my rule of thumb is to reinforce any unit if it has 3 or fewer steps for tanks and 4 or fewer for infantry, regardless of what it does to their experience. But do keep in mind that because veterans and elites suffer from fewer losses, you can combine them with a special forces steps, which adds another bonus to friendly losses, and you might even pull off a 3-step tank or a 4-step infantry. As I said, depends. Zones of control are one of those game mechanics that aren't too glamorous. You're not lobbing 21cm shells at anyone after all, but they are simply everywhere and can give you a nice little boost if you know how they work. So, on a technical level, there's nothing to zones of control at all. A unit projects it into every friendly hex around it, and any enemy unit that enters one of such hexes will lose all of its remaining movement for the turn, but once that hex is captured, the enemy can freely move through it. Weak units, in other words, units that have fewer than 3 active steps, do not project a zone of control and don't restrict any movement around them. These very simple rules lead us to a bunch of interesting conclusions. 1, you don't always have to literally draw solid defensive lines with your divisions, plopping a unit in every hex. Do it only where you expect focused offensives or where you want to hold specific ground. To just cover your flanks, leave 2 hexes between your divisions. This will create a continuous zone of control line that will take the enemy 2 divisions to actually pierce. More than enough for the opportunistic cavalry raids people sometimes hate the AI in this game for. And if you plop a division in every other hex, it'll take the enemy 3 units to penetrate, and it's overkill for most situations like this. Also note that for a unit to be weak, it has to have fewer than 3 active steps. So sometimes a unit blocks your advance, but attacking it is costly or you don't want it to retreat. So you can try launching a suppression fire or a feint attack, rendering it weak, and then have your way deep behind enemy lines. Which actually leads me to the final point. Avoid getting your fast units stuck in enemy zones of control. Let the infantry do the initial damage, even if it involves losses. Use your infantry to clear the immediate zone of control hexes, and only then send the tanks in to block supply lines, to approach objectives, to mop up, beat up enemy divisions. Deep operation, baby. It works. And by the way, speaking of rushing in, don't forget that recon specialist steps create an area of friendly hexes around and in front of the unit as it advances, which can slow down potential counterattack maneuvers by the enemy. Yes, oh god and gasp, you can actually save your progress in Unity of Command. While the entire series has notoriously not had an official option for saving, there is one way that I think is clearly at least semi-official. The game actually keeps the transparently named files with your campaigns deep in the users folder, and really does nothing to hide them. The semi-official part comes from the fact that you can go there by clicking the Open Saved Games folder in the main menu of the bloody game, which saves your progress roughly at the beginning of every turn and in between the missions. So, to make a save point, to which you can easily revert, create another folder, make sure it's creatively named, and then copy the file with your campaign there. Whenever you want to load your game, just copy that file back into the main save folder and overwrite. Just make sure you go to the main menu in the game first, because it won't work and can cause a crash otherwise. Some people might consider it cheating, or not in the spirit of the game, or not properly hardcore. So let me play self-proclaimed Unity of Command 2 Chad here for a second and say tish to that. Go forth and multiply those files. You only have one life and your time is more valuable than any game. I always save my missions on the first turn after the battle preparation round, just to spare myself the need to redo all of the reinforcements and reshuffle all the specialist hubs and HQs whenever I want to restart, and so should you. Making a separate save during conferences is also a good idea if you want to explore forks in the campaign, or just in case you screwed up big and need to roll back more than one conference. What should you buy your HQs? And the short answer is, HQs are gorgeous and wonderful in our future, and we should do everything for them to prosper. More pragmatically, upgrading your HQs is the best bang for your prestige buck, and you should buy new abilities at conferences and spend prestige on command points during level ups. The problem is that your resources are probably, and if you're in Stalingrad, definitely limited. The HQs are numerous and you have to make painful decisions. So the first thing you do in a campaign setting is plan ahead. There is an official mission chart for every campaign in the game, and you can literally count every HQ to see which one gets the most work. Your first priority is to make sure that your HQs can launch all types of attacks available in the game. Suppressive fire, set-piece attack, feint attack. Upgrading them on level ups is also a priority. There's little better than getting 6 or 7 feints around, because you've leveled up and they cost a point apiece. The next step is Pontoon Bridge and increasing the range of the HQ. Both of these will simplify your logistics and can occasionally create exploitable opportunities not expected by scenario designers. For Germans, the oversupply ability should come right after the attacks, especially in the Panzer Group HQs, which, by the way, don't need much improvement in their movement range. On tier 3, you have Motor Pool, which is great, but mostly on larger maps. Recon Enforce is situational, but very handy for blasting through annoying zones of control or level 3 stragglers. Rear Guard, a must for defensive scenarios, of which there aren't many. And finally, for the Soviets, the level 3 Force Pool perk that prevents you from losing command points as you eat up friendly stragglers. It works really well, but not all of your HQs need it. All of the rest of the abilities are very much on a like-to-have level, and unless strictly required by the mission at hand, buying specialist steps instead is a better idea. Finally, an important note about the Stalingrad DLC. Rearguard and especially counterattack are indispensable for your panzer armies, and some of the missions may turn out to be much tougher without them, so get those abilities in Stalingrad. And let's end this sufficiently protracted lecture with something vague, unfun, and obvious. Read the faffing manual. I mean, no need for cheers and applause at this splendid piece of advice I'm dishing out, but seriously, it's there in the game folder, well written, and easily containing 85% of the information I've discussed in this video. I'm not advocating for reading it start to finish, after all, it's not gonna take you on a ripping action-packed adventure, but whenever you find yourself stuck, wondering, why do I suck so badly? Consult the manual on the topic, and it might just have an answer for why exactly. Especially since so much of scenario design in this game revolves around familiarity with various mechanics. Case in point, back when I was playing the Moscow 41 DLC, I got seriously stuck at Demyansk Offensive, which, if you don't know, has 3 objectives that are towns and at the same time sources of enemy supply, and tend to have strong fortified units in them by the time you reach them. I had an absolutely miserable time trying to clear them through all sorts of tricks, including fire suppression attacks, which give you a chance of destroying fortifications, but as you know now, also very often turned towns into ruins, and mission-ending event almost always. So, desperate, I looked at the manual, and there it was. Set-piece attacks offer a much lower chance of ruining the city, and if an engineer is involved, the set-piece attack counts as an engineer attack that always reduces fortifications, in addition to the fact that the Red Army can do set-piece attacks with just the engineers and no artillery, making them even safer against cities. Shockingly, I didn't know any of that, and had a very vague idea of what set-piece attacks did that somehow got me through previous campaigns, all the way until Demyansk. Did this knowledge make Demyansk easy? No. Did it make it doable? You bet. And this important point of doability is a perfect time for me to end this video. Thank you all for watching, and in addition to all of the like-scribing, please let me know in the comments what you find difficult, unfathomable, frustrating, or just plain annoying in Unity of Command. I actually have a few leftover points that didn't end up in this video, so with your thoughts, there might be a sequel. Cheers.